Hello friends, and welcome back to the third video in this making series. We are focusing on learning all kinds of beginner techniques. So first week we learned how to make a pair of earrings, second week we learned how to make a twisted fidget ring, and today I'm going to show you how to make a cutout pendant for a necklace. Actually, this is great timing because this is actually a commission for a friend of mine. And yeah, it's really good and fun and easy, and you don't need too many tools. One tool you do need if you're going to do details on the pendant is a drill. So if you don't have a drill, you can still totally do this just with a saw and your bench peg clipped to any old table, and you can just cut out a simple shape and you don't need to worry about all of the details on the piece. So you can work around that. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump right in and let's get making. First of all, what you'll need to do is decide what shape you want to cut out. If this is your first time ever using a piercing saw, I would actually recommend doing the earrings tutorial first, because that really gives you basics with using the saw, and when you're more comfortable and familiar with it, then you can move into cutting out slightly more complex shapes. But have some fun, grab a piece of copper or some scraps, and then just cut until you feel comfortable with it. Another important thing to remember is always to cut just outside the shape. So always make sure that you have enough space on your metal to allow you to cut the outside of it and then file down. Today I am actually going to be making this little pendant here. So this is a commission, like I said, and the customer wants this specific design. And so I'm going to be using this picture, but if you want to just draw freehand and go with it, whatever you prefer is good. If you are working from a picture like this, what you need to do is grab yourself some double-sided tape, and then we're going to stick this design onto the sheet of metal. So let's show you how to do that. So I have bought this piece of 1.2 mil thick sheet. That is the right size for the design, and it's 100% recycled. Yay! So what you need to think about when you're choosing the thickness of your sheet is the complexity of the design. So for example, this one that I'm doing, there's a lot of quite thin areas, so it might become quite fragile if I were to use a quite thin sheet of metal. Obviously, I work with like millimeters, but you can convert that to wherever you are and whatever works in your country. But this is 1.2 mil thick, which is quite sturdy. Like usually I work with thinner metal, but like I was saying, it depends on the complexity and the size. So if your design is quite small, you can go with a thinner sheet. The thinnest that I would recommend using is 0.5 mil, especially if it's a small design or if it's for a pair of earrings or something like that. But as soon as the shape becomes more flimsy or delicate, then you want to increase that thickness. Also, another thing to remember is if you texture it with a hammer, then that will also harden the metal. So then you could still go with a thinner metal. There isn't really a exact size I can give you, but just look at it and you'll get more familiar with the thickness of the metal over time and see what you think works or doesn't work. So if you're still practicing, I would definitely recommend starting in copper and do like a little sample in that first and see, does it feel really flimsy or does it feel hard wearing? So obviously earrings don't get like bashed around too much, they just hang on the side of your face looking pretty. So you want to consider using a lighter one then as well, because obviously the weight on your ear is going to be a bit uncomfortable. But if you're making a pendant, then that kind of, especially if it's on a longer chain, you're going to want to use something a little bit thicker and it has a better weight to it. So have a think about your design for now and choose something that you feel is appropriate. And like I was saying, maybe start with something that's a little bit more solid to begin with in terms of your complexity of your design. Anyway, so what we're going to do now is I'm just going to cut out this like excess paper here. And I've made sure that I measured and printed this out. I did this on just a document, a Google Word document, and got it the size that I wanted to. Sometimes there's a little bit of trial and error and you got to go up and down a little bit, but that is going to fit over here. And this is the size that the customer wants it. So I just got a little bit extra metal. Yes, I could have gone a tiny bit less, but always the scraps, we're going to keep them anyway, so it's all good. I'm going to actually cut off a tiny little bit extra on the bottom here. And then we're going to use the double-sided tape and stick that directly onto the plastic coating. So what I do is I stick this to the paper first. I can get that up here. So I'm going to stick this behind here, and then I'll peel that off afterwards. So you can also just scribe directly onto your sheet if you want to, into this plastic, if you have an idea. Or what you can also do is to draw it on paper, cut out the paper, and then trace around the paper like a template. Obviously, because this one's quite complex, I'm going to go a little bit more. I'm just going to go with this option. There we go. And I'm going to stick this right in the corner because we never want to waste metal. Like that. I don't know if you guys can hear the music in the background, but there's the neighbors are playing music, so soz about that. Okay, what we're going to do now is to use the piercing saw and cut out the shape, but just cut a little bit bigger, like I was saying, bigger than you want it to be. So let's do that. So just before I start cutting, if you are doing it freehand, then you want to use something like this. So some kind of scribe, basically it's just a pointy metal tip, and use that, because if you use a pen, it's going to rub off when you're cutting and then your design's going to get lost. So make sure you use this, but you don't need to press super, super hard, just enough to kind of just see the lines in your plastic. Okay, let's get going. So when you start with your blade at an angle, and then you want to straighten out your blade. The reason you want to do this is because it's going to give you a much cleaner line, especially if you have a thicker metal. You want your blade to be really nice and upright, and just keep blowing off the excess little bits that form, and cut outside your line so that you can file up to that line. And obviously this is very thick metal, so this is going to take some time, so just take your time and go nice and slowly. So if you start seeing little bits of sawdust as you're sawing, then just move your piece back. You want to use your bench peg quite cleverly so that you have it always supported over this top end. If you're here and things are wobbling around, that's when you're going to start breaking blades. So I always like to put my finger underneath the bench peg like this and kind of pinch. It's easier than just trying to stabilize like this. So grab underneath and then go like that. And you want to really avoid suddenly twisting your blade, because if you do that, then you are going to break it. So if you need to turn, you need to do it very gradually, even if that means turning on a spot and staying without pushing it. You just keep turning it slowly, slowly to open that space on the spot so that you can change directions. And when you can, do nice long strokes. Obviously this is like an organic sort of shape, doesn't matter too much if like a tiny bit is a little bit more wonky or not, but depending on what you're cutting, just allow yourself enough space to file back. So here you'll see at the top, when we need to turn the blade quite sharply, I'm going to go all the way just beyond, and then I'm going to stay on the spot and just slowly open with my blade, turn it a tiny bit and go up and down, up and down, up and down, turn a tiny little bit up and down, up and down, up and down, until we've redirected, and then go a tiny bit this way, and then I'm going to redirect. But if you twist suddenly, you're going to snap that blade. Here again, I'm going to cut on the spot and keep turning slowly, slowly, slowly on the spot until you basically open a round hole where it is. If it gets stuck, just release and your metal will swing back to its freest position. I'm going to cut around here. This is quite a cool design in terms of it's got the jump ring built into it. Obviously you can solder on a jump ring afterwards if you want to, but I quite like that idea for this one because it's also a really thick metal, so it'll save me having to heat it up. Because when you heat it up, metal, then it softens. So you can kind of counteract that by putting it in a barrel polisher afterwards to harden the metal afterwards. But if you can avoid softening it in the first place, then you may as well do that. So if you want to, you can lubricate the blade by rubbing it through some beeswax, which helps the blade slide through a bit. I am cutting fairly close to the line. That's because I'm fairly confident in like my use of the blade, so I'm going a little bit closer than I would recommend you do when you start, but it's just going to save me a bit of filing later. So I'm just trying to do as best job as I can, like as you see over there, like that's fairly close. There, little butterfly. Great. Okay, I'm covered in dust. Okay, so what we want to do now is to drill holes where all of these little details are, so then I can get my blade in there and then continue cutting that shape. So as you look on the edge, if I had my blade really at an angle, this would be very uneven, like say it could even be slanted like this, or you know, like this. So that's why having it straight, the point of contact is so much smaller, so you're able to get a much smoother edge there. So I'm quite happy with that. I think that looks good. Obviously you'll have your your marks from the blade, but that's fine because then we're going to file that and sand that and make it look all lovely. Okay, so before you drill, what you want to do is just to take your little scribe and your mallet and then just make a little gentle tap so that you have a little groove on where you're going to drill. So this will stop the drill bit like swimming around, because if you don't have anywhere for it to grip, then it's just going to swim around and make a big gouge in your metal, and you don't want that. So you don't want to hit too hard, especially if your metal's quite thin. You're going to really distort the metal. So just really do it just like duck. Obviously that sounds quite loud actually, but it's not too loud. I mean, it's not too hard. There we have it. Right, so let's go and drill all of those holes. Loads and loads of holes. Right, safety first, pop your goggles on and let's get drilling. So make sure you line up the tip of the drill bit with your little groove that you've made. Hold it nice and tight with your left hand. Pop it on. And up. If it doesn't want to go through, you can kind of like zzz, 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 like kind of do it in stages rather than trying to force it, because then the blade might just, the drill bit might just stop or hook, and then your piece is going to get very, very hot. So rather just do it in stages if it doesn't want to go through. Or just buy a new drill bit. It's obviously getting blunt. Okie dokes. Let's drill all of these holes. So take your time to set up each one before going for it. I like to keep this drill handle quite close to where I'm going to go, because it just is right and nice and easy to put the on button here. So we have lots of little silver bits flying all over the place. If you're wondering what kind of drill to buy, if you haven't bought a drill yet, then I would actually recommend the Proxon. This is the Dremel, yes, but as you see, like when I go down, it kind of like wiggles a little bit, which is a little bit fiddly to work with. But the Proxon one is obviously built into its whole stand, so it's a lot more user-friendly. It is a little bit more expensive, but if you want to like invest in a good proper solid one, I would do that. But otherwise, this is like the handheld Dremel, but then you can just buy like a little stand for it, which I've got here, which works fine. But as you can see, it's not super steady, and especially when you're doing teeny tiny little things like this, it can be a little bit tricky and take a bit of concentration and care to make sure it does go down in the right place. Anyway, we manage. Right, first of all, what you want to do is to open your blade here on the bottom and then feed your piece onto it. I'm going to go with this nice big one on the top here to start off with. And then make sure that your design is facing up to the top so that you can see what you're doing. And then I kind of just push it all the way up there so that it's not weighing down too much over there if it's quite heavy. Then I push into it here and then tighten that blade so that it's got a nice tight tension. And then just cut really carefully as you can. And then what we're going to do is you can file out if you've got like bigger sections that a file will fit into. There's all different profiles of needle files and you can use those. Because this one is quite teeny tiny, I'm going to do my best at cutting it as carefully as I can with the blade, because I'm not sure that the files are going to actually fit into any of these grooves. So my smallest file is my blade. So that's what you can use as well. So let's go. So remember, make sure that it's all nice and steady and stable on a good place on your bench peg, and then blade nice and straight, and off we go. And for turning again, on the spot, keep rotating on the spot, on the spot, on the spot, until it opens up and you can turn. Same over here, on the spot, on the spot, on the spot. I'm not pushing forwards at all, I'm just going on the spot till I can open up that space, change direction. And when you're putting it down, be careful that your blade isn't twisted, because then it'll just snap straight away. So make sure that it is loose on there, and then find a nice stable place. If it hooks, it's because you've put it down and the piece is like to the side a little bit. And if you do that too much, it's gonna hook and snap. So just find the point where it loosens. And then maybe you need to move it again, just to make sure it's always nice and stable. And one piece out. Great. And then again, it's going to be a long process with this piece, so we will speed up a bit, but again, open it up, put it into your next one. Nice and tight. And there we go. Cut out all of these tiny little shapes on the wings, and I used my blade kind of like just as a file inside them to try and do the best job I can. Obviously when I take the paper off, I'll be able to see if I need to clean up any other bits, but for now that is those bits done. But I just wanted to stop and talk to you guys about this section here. So obviously I'm using quite thick metal here, so 1.2 millimeters thick, which is quite good, but still I'm very nervous about this section here. This original necklace was actually made in stainless steel, which has a quite different properties to silver, because silver is a lot softer. So I don't want to risk cutting this whole section out. So I'm just going to adapt the design slightly. So I'm going to cut out this section and this section so we have a thick middle bit here. So I'm going to do that. And then also these little holes over here, I'm going to drill those with a drill bit so that they're nice and perfectly round. With a slightly bigger drill bit than I used, because the size of this hole is the exact same size as my jump ring, so it's not going to have any wiggle room, and we want it to be able to move around freely and not feel like it gets stuck. So let's cut this section out and then I'll do the drill. Right, now it is time to take off all of this plastic and see how it actually looks underneath everything and clean it up. So see, that came off quite easily. And get rid of any sharp bits and maybe like go into some of the little holes again and clarify the shape a little bit. So obviously I'll need to clean up places like this that I couldn't quite see with the paper on. So either if it's a big enough space like that, I can go in with like a triangular file, for example, into there, or I can just grab my blade again and just kind of go from there and clean that up a little bit because I have enough space over there. But overall, I think it's looking okay. I will just go and clean up all of those and then obviously clean up the edge as well and drill these holes. So I'm gonna start off by just cleaning up all of these little spaces in here first. So I'm just putting this back on here, and then I'm just gonna like use my blade to kind of file, because obviously a lot of these are really small. So over here I'm just gonna cut off a little bit extra. But you can kind of just like hold the file at an angle. Sorry, the file. I'm saying file because I'm using it like a file. Hold the blade at a bit of an angle and just kind of work your way and kind of like take off the metal there. Obviously if it's a bigger area and you need to just cut off, then just go for that and cut. I'm gonna just kind of clean up all of these spaces. That is the thing with when you stick on a design, you do need to do a fair bit more cleaning up because you can't actually see super clearly. But for an intricate design that's symmetrical like this, you kind of need a bit more of a guide. See how I'm like kind of holding the file on the side at a bit of an angle, just to kind of shave it, basically is what I'm doing. You can actually control quite well, and like for this I tried to with a triangle file, it just doesn't fit in there, so I'm just going to do it with the blade rather, and just neaten up all of these lines and just kind of make it look a bit better. If you go like suddenly at too much of an angle like this, then you're kind of gonna cut into it, and then you're gonna have a little like hook thingy that's gonna be a little bit hard to work with. So you want to really just like do it just so it can still slide along that edge, rather than like starting a new cut in a whole new direction. Also, like you probably noticed I do put my finger occasionally in front, but I'm being so careful, and it's not going to come out of here. As long as I'm not going at an angle, my finger's there. Sometimes it's just a lot easier to hold it stable if my finger is in front, but I'm being super careful not to accidentally cut my finger, because we've all done that before and it hurts. So, see, I'm just kind of like filing, but then over here as well. So it might actually be easier for me to turn this one around and go from here and then cut this bit out, just to shave that. Obviously these shapes are kind of organic-y. It's a butterfly wing, so as long as they look the same on both sides. I don't really want to cut too much of that off there, so I think I'm going to keep that like that and make the other one look similar to this. Obviously this takes time, and this is kind of an intricate design, but like I was saying in the beginning, like, you start with a shape that you feel comfortable with, and if you don't have a drill, just go with one that doesn't have any bits that need cutting out, and then you can always solder on a jump ring if you have a soldering setup but you don't have a drill yet. So there's ways around it. There's plenty you can do on very limited tools. Like this, literally, I could do this entire thing just with this blade and some sandpaper and little needle files. And again, it's really a good idea to hold it as far up on your bench peg as you can. If it's really here, especially because I've used this bench peg for many years, it's a bit angled from all the filing that I've done. So this is my stable spot here. It doesn't wobble when I hold it there. Compared to here, it's going to wobble. Whenever it wobbles, that's when you're going to break blades. So you want to always have it far up on your bench peg as you can, obviously without cutting into the bench peg itself, but it'll be a lot easier for you to hold it this way. Yeah, if you guys have any questions about anything, or how to do it with something else, or feel free to drop a comment down below, and I'll just try my best to get back to you all and answer all of those things. And I really hope you're finding this helpful, and if there's anything else in particular you want me to add to the making series, then let me know. Obviously we're doing a good couple of weeks of it, focusing on different skills. Some of them you might find a little bit easier, some of them you might find a bit harder, but just work your way through. And if you don't feel like you've mastered one and you want to continue making like more cutouts and really getting the hang of the saw, then go for it before you move on to the next one, because obviously they increase in difficulty as you go, because you'll be developing your skills. So just work at your own pace and don't feel like, oh, I'm getting left behind and oops, I'm not able to do that yet. Just practice, take your time, and whichever skills you feel you need to work on more, whether it's filing, sawing, soldering, just spend more time working on those skills and developing those, because some of them take a lot longer to really grasp. So some of them you need a setup for, but just go at your own pace. Like there's no like, oh my god, I'm falling behind or anything like that. Just do it in your own time and have fun with it. And just once you've learned those skills, like once you've learned how to saw, then you can do so much with it. Then just like have fun and make a bunch of pieces that are like nice cutouts, and just get familiar with the technique so that you can then make more complex designs further down the line. So I don't usually do lots of cutout work like this, but it's quite fun actually. It's kind of meditative because it's going to take you a while. So you just get in the zone and then just go. Right, so I think I'm happy with the way that looks now. So as you can see, there's probably going to be lots of like little bits of like fine filings in each one of those. But obviously that's only because it's going to be along the edge of the shapes you've cut out. So we can just rub that on sandpaper so we can get rid of all of those. And then I'll do the edge and make that all lovely and smooth to the touch. So I'm just going to rub that on here. So it's always good to make sure it's on a really nice flat surface and there's no little bits underneath that are causing little lumps. And as this is this piece of metal obviously hasn't got any scratches or anything like that on it. I'm just going straight for this is an 800 grit sandpaper, so it's just going to give it a nice finish. So I'm just going to give that a little once over. Stay going in the same direction, because if you start changing directions, you're going to get all those little lines on there. So I'm going to just do this, and then you can have a look at how that's looking there. Can the camera see that? Whenever you're sewing, you're going to be pushing like the metal to the edge, so it's always going to have like a sharp edge around it. So you want to really just work that so that the edges, that whole surface is smooth. Now that I've sanded that and that's all looking good, I need to finalize the edge. So as you can see, this one here, from the one side, it is fairly in the middle, but from the other side, it's a bit closer to the edge. That's because this was one point where I didn't have the blade completely straight, so it went a bit closer there, but that's fine. I'm just going to file that so that's a bit smaller, and this as well, so that the jump ring that I use doesn't need to be too big, because if the gap, like if your metal is quite wide there, you're going to obviously need to make a big jump ring to cover that, and we always want to have like a smaller jump ring because it is less attention grabbing. So I'm going to fix up those, and then over here you can see as well, this area is a bit rounder. This one I just need to smooth that bit off there so that it follows the same shape as that side, and tiny little piece of sharp thing over there that I want to file off. So I'm just going to file all those little bits, and then we're going to want to get rid of all of these file and saw marks on the edge here. So I'm going to do that with sandpaper, handheld sandpaper, and just get in all of those grooves and give that the whole edge like a nice finish. So when you're doing that as well, you want to kind of go along the edges a little bit at a slight angle, so that you don't have any sharpness to that. So obviously you got so many different needle files you can use. Like for this, for example, I'm going to use my half round, which is a great shape for in here. So just find whatever shape you have that works best for what you need to get into. With a big file, I only go forwards, but with the little ones, I go backwards and forwards. Obviously, if there's a weak point, just be aware of like putting too much pressure on that. So I'm holding it in a way that it isn't going to bend suddenly. I don't think it will, because this is pretty thick metal, but if you're using a thinner one, just to be aware of how you're holding it when you're doing that. So that's already nearly there. And make sure that you're not doing like angle like this or angle like this, because you want that edge to be the same on both sides, so the shape looks the same on both sides. So, sorry if you can't see exactly what I'm doing there, but there you go, something like that. And I'm just going to do a tiny little bit there because it's point and this bit's round. Yes, I may be just being a bit fiddly, but I'm just going to make it look the same. So you'll see, like, obviously the tip of the file has a smaller profile, so it's a bit easier to use in certain areas. But yeah, I think just a tiny bit more. I'm going to spend a little time here because obviously this is like quite a prominent shape within the design. Like the smaller little shapes, you know, you're not really going to notice them too much, but I think that looks fine to me. And then there was this little sharp bit here I wanted to get rid of, so I'm going to use the flat side for that. And here I find it easier just to go the same. When you want more control, basically, that's when you go follow the direction of the file and just keep moving forward. But if like you're in a space like that, it's easier to go backwards and forwards, then I do that. But the general rule is that with files, they do most of the work when you're going forward. They don't do as much when you're pulling them backwards. Okay, so that is that, and then I wanted to just, this tip here is a bit pointy and the other one's a bit round. And just round it off so that it's comfortable as well, doesn't poke the person. Like that. So I'm using the small file because I'm just taking off a little bit and it just helps me get into all of those places. Now for this part here, for these things where the jump rings are going to go, I just want to reduce that there. So I'm actually going to switch up to a bigger file. I'm going to use this one, but just be careful not to do it anywhere else by accident. The bigger file also does leave more grooves, which is fine because we're going to sand it, but that's because my file is a little bit coarser. I think it was a 2 if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. When it comes to buying files, I really can't emphasize enough like how important it is to buy good quality files. So German or Swiss made, like Swiss is the best. I like the chocolate. My Belgian boyfriend probably annoyed me saying that. But
he's also not gonna put that in the video.
Yeah, he is. Swiss chocolate's so good. But yes, Swiss made files are really high quality, and they do cost a bit more obviously, but it's really worth the while, because working with a horrible file is just so annoying, and you can just tell straight away like when you use a good quality file. So don't skimp on files is my thoughts on that matter. So see, I'm just kind of shaping this as I go, because I don't want to like suddenly take a plot in one place. I'm just kind of assessing it as I go, like how about that, maybe I'll stop there, maybe take a little bit more off. But obviously if your metal is quite thin, to be honest, I wouldn't do this. I would solder on the jump ring afterwards, because this metal is already quite thick. It's gonna be totally fine. Right, so I've just given it a once round with the sandpaper in my hand, and also a combination of my pendant motor, because it's really nice to get things done a little bit quicker. But if you don't have one of those, just use sandpaper in your hand. So for getting rid of like the main file and saw lines, use like a 400 grit sandpaper, and then work your way up to 600 if you want to. But the more you use the sandpaper, the smoother it gets, so you can kind of do that quite well with that. Obviously, to speed things up, we use this, but this can't fit in everywhere anyway. So even like in these little more angular grooves, I need to do it by hand. So I have done that, and then just give it a last little like rub with some fine sandpaper for a really nice last final finish on the edges. I've just finished sanding all of that, and I'm going to put the chain on. So I've just got a length of chain here. So when you're using jump rings, obviously you need to make sure that you have big enough little links so that you can put the jump ring through. Sometimes you can also wiggle them a little bit. So I'm going to take my scribe and just put it into the tip, and then just open it like that so that it's a bit bigger, so I can get the jump ring in there. So here. So remember, with jump rings, you always need to open them sideways. If you do it like this, then you're going to misshapen them. So I'm going to put this on here, and hopefully this fits. Right, so pop that onto there, and then I'm going to put that onto the one side of this. And then close that up. So get them to push nice and close together. Make sure that there's a bit of tension between them and they're not overlapping, so they're not scratchy. And there's one side. Just check that does have movement, which is great. That's what we want. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So you don't want to push too hard or you're going to break it. You just want to just stretch the metal just a little bit. And then open your jump ring out. So I'm just holding it between my fingers so that I have control over that jump ring so it doesn't wiggle around too much. Depending on the thickness of your metal, you might need to open this a little bit more, but that works. And then close that up. So you don't want to have any gap, because that's when things can fall off. Nice and tight. I always use as thick as jump ring as I can get away with. In terms of the chain and the hole. Just going to cut that one jump ring to open that out. There we go. And then same thing here, just going to open these both out a little bit. 1 and 2. So you can use obviously pre-made chains completely, but it's up to you. Save you the time of having to put these on the end yourself. When you do buy these little lobster claws, you know, you obviously have lots of different sizes and shapes. Some of them come that are soldered closed. So if you do, then you need to add an extra jump ring on. I think actually these ones are open. So that's great. So I don't need to add an extra jump ring. I can just open this one on the side. So I actually don't need that extra jump ring. Open that one up. And now when you're putting on a clasp, think that most people are right-handed. Obviously, if it's for someone who's left-handed, keep that in mind. But you want to put the clasp on the side that is their dominant hand. So I've chosen which side I want to face forward. And I'm going to just hook that on there. And then close that up. Like that. And then the other little jump ring on the other side is going to hook into that. So just maybe test that the thickness of your jump ring isn't bigger than the gap in your lobster claw, because obviously they're only open to a certain point. They have that little gap. So just test that out, and then put this in here. Wiggly, wiggly, wiggly guy. Right, and then close that up. And yes, you can go and solder these if you want to now, but just for the sake of this, I'm going to leave it at that and show you how that looks. So, see what I mean? But that needs to fit in there. You don't want that to be too small, that the jump ring doesn't fit in there, because then it becomes really fiddly to put on. Ta-da! There we have it. So, there it is. So hopefully she likes it. Little butterfly pendant. Da-da-da. And I think the thickness of the metal was a good choice here, because it feels quite sturdy and doesn't feel fragile, like it's going to bend or break. So I hope you enjoyed that, and join me next week where we learn how to make a bezel setting for a stone. So that will be another fun hands-on, very step-by-step tutorial, and I'll explain in detail how to go about getting that nice flush join and all of those things. And also I have a question for you guys. I am thinking about doing a creative workshop online where I teach you guys how to come up with designs for a collection, for example. So work you through that creative process in a really fun way that gets your creative juices flowing. So drop a comment down below if you think that would be something you'd be interested in. So I'm thinking probably like a 3-hour workshop, just a one-off to start off with, and probably around, for the first one, a 50 pound mark. But just chucking it out there, seeing if you guys are interested. Let me know if that sounds like something you would like. Because obviously when you come up with a new collection, often we wonder how, where, how do you come up with really like creative different designs. So let me know if you would be interested in that. I haven't set it up yet, but I'm just gauging for interest for now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you next week in another video. So speak to you soon. Have a beautiful week, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.